Chapter 19. The next morning, she found that a package had been delivered sometime during the night. Little Bud stood next to it, performing a ta-da gesture as she shuffled over and unwrapped it. Moments later, she had the wings unit strapped on and was ready to give them a try. "Don't worry, it's perfectly safe," she said to the little bud, hoping it was true. She flicked the switch and felt the elegant unfurling of the wings. Looking up, she saw that they were made with much finer details than the ones in the cylinder station, with gilded inlays. "Fancy," she said admiringly. A few soft warm-up flaps, a deep breath, and then she reached out as if to grab the air and pull herself up. The wings responded in kind, and she felt herself lift up into the air. A few more strokes, and she was high above the cabin and surrounding area. Gazing around the expansive domed area, she thought to herself, maybe she should move house, try living in different areas. Then she launched herself forward, gliding well over the highest trees and whooping loudly at the thrill as she zoomed past areas she had already explored. She decided to fly over to the giant tree first. A few short moments later, and she was carefully perching on a branch near the top. This was wonderful. She could now explore the dome much quicker than before. She launched herself again and set off towards the nearest edge of the dome, accelerating joyfully. She realized how distant the edge actually was. Even from this height and speed, it seemed to approach slowly, revealing the true enormity of the space inside this incredible station. She slowed her flight and decided instead to land near a breathtaking garden she spotted below. An intricate maze of color, textures, and fragrances woven together in botanical harmony. She lingered there for a long while, exploring and inhaling the scents before heading back to her cabin to reconsider her plans to explore the land under the dome. Little Bud sat patiently waiting for her return. "Hey, buddy," she said carefully. "No word from Oldest, I presume?" The little bud shook, indicating no. She felt slightly unnerved. Had she made it all the way here just to get ignored? "So, my little friend, I have an idea." She explained to Little Bud her plan to use the wings to explore the dome in sections, finding other resting places along the way. "The problem will be supplies. Is there a way to find food or the other stuff as I go?" The little bud paused a moment to grow the wires that allowed it to speak in a comical gnomish voice, presenting a thin metallic device. "If you keep this with you, I will always know where you are. And whenever you want something from services, you can speak it in there and I will make sure it finds you." The little bud said joyfully at the thought of being of service. She laughed, imagining the luxurious meals she would order as she flapped her way around the magnificent domed world. This was very close to being too good to be true. "That's brilliant. I'll set off tomorrow." The next day, she took flight, exploring deeper into the dome. Each flight carried her further, with days passing in blissful exploration and discovery. She flew steadily, pausing at lush forests, open grasslands, and shimmering lakes, teeming with curious life. At night, she rested beneath the stars that twinkled gently through the mysterious domed ceiling. She eventually reached a black sand beach at the nearest edge. Waves lapped softly against the shore, tempting her to remove her clothes and wings, stepping carefully into the gentle waters. Exotic fish and aquatic life moved around her, unafraid, as if welcoming her into their hidden world. After donning her gear again, she flew to a nearby house that would be her abode for the night. A beautiful beach hut overlooking the small sea that ended with the edge of the dome and empty space. The dome was varyingly murky, it seemed. Sometimes it was clear as glass, then at other times it was clouded and misty. She could not figure out what governed it, but right now she could barely see beyond its edge. A week passed like that, and then another. She had seen so much in such a short time, taking a break now and then just to chill and digest everything, and wonder where the Lord of the Dome was, and if she would be thinking of more active ways to reach his attention. She was happy to enjoy her great fortune here in the Dome. However, a part of her was still focused on her quest. It had been almost 2 years now since she left Earth. She worried for her friends and her city. Would they be there when she got back? If she even made it back? Where was Oldest? And then the day came. Finally. Having explored the dome end to end, she was now flying along the coast of the third edge. The waves here had a violent tone about them as they hammered the imposing cliffs that lined the majestic fjords there. The ins and outs of the land, surrounded by lashing ocean, formed what looked like fingers of an enormous giant's hand. On the tip of the middle finger, standing upon a grassy hill by the edge of the cliff, she found him, the oldest man in the world, positioned behind a box that supported what looked like a large canvas painting. She flew in and landed at the base of the hill, a good polite distance away, then switched off the wings so that they folded gracefully away. She was hesitating, taking slow steps towards the hill. What now? Oldest had not moved or even glanced up at her, fixated on the canvas that he was working on. She felt a lot of conflicting emotions. Joy at finally standing by what had to be the man himself. Insecurity at his apparent disregard for her arrival. Anger to find him casually painting instead of engaged at some critical world-shifting task. She pushed them all aside and started up the hill towards him. She was a few steps away and just about to say something when he pointed with the end of his brush at another box that lay on the grass just below where he stood on the hilltop. "Is that for me?" she asked, now more confused than ever. Came from the old painter, probably Oldest, who kept his focus locked on his work. She felt curious to see what he was painting. From here the view was breathtaking. Two of the giant's fingers stretched out before them, framed by the vast ocean backdrop. Climbing up to take a peek somehow seemed rude, so she picked up the box instead and examined it. It contained another canvas and an assortment of art supplies. Seriously? She thought, momentarily annoyed, then immediately softened by the idea of joining him painting. Sharing a creative moment seemed like as good a step as any in meeting the legendary figure she had traveled so far to find. Although looking at the old man, a part of her wondered if he was somebody else, another visitor grown old waiting to meet oldest. Either way, she would paint first and ask questions later. She set up a bit lower down the hill and started mixing colors, getting the right hues of blues to give the painting a bit of depth. She quickly lost track of time and her canvas began to fill out, the cliffs and ocean emerging in amateurish, impressionistic brushstrokes. She was thinking to herself that it was not bad, and contemplating if she should add or change something, when she noticed that the old painter had left his easel and was now standing silently behind her, observing. "You did a good job capturing the waves and the cliffs," said the old man, contemplating her work. "Perhaps the sky could be a bit more colorful to liven up the scene a bit." She wanted to turn around, wanted to launch into one of the speeches she had gone over again and again in her anticipation of this moment. But she could not. All she did was just nod and continue to look at her modestly fine work and think that more color in the sky was a good idea. Should she do it now, while he was watching, or he saved her the worry of choice? "Would you like to see what I painted?" he offered expectantly. She looked up and nodded at him, sounding a mm-hmm as he had before. Standing up, she followed him up to the top of the hill, where the canvas was still propped up. She stared at it, transfixed, spellbound. Tears welled unexpectedly, moved by a depth of emotion she could not hold back. The painting was of her. The fjords stretched out under sky ablaze with color, and there she was, captured in vibrant details, wings unfolded covering more than half the canvas. It was a masterwork unlike any she had ever seen. "Oh, wow," she heard herself whisper, unable to unlock her gaze from it. New layers of detail springing forth the longer she stared at it. "You like it?" said the master painter, who was increasingly likely to be oldest. "See what I mean about the sky?" He did not wait for an answer. Instead, he turned and started down the hill, leaving the canvases behind. "Are you coming?" he called over his shoulder. She paused, thinking what to do with the paintings. His more than hers. "Leave them. The elves will take care of it," he said. So she did, and hurried after him. After quite a few moments of walking side by side in silence, she finally found the courage to speak. "You are the oldest, are you not?" He gave her a curious glance, one eye squinted. "Who's asking?" That took her by surprise. Did he not know who she was? "You don't know who I am?" she asked uneasily. "I know who I think you are. I want to know if you know who you think you are," the old master painter said, and jumped over a gentle stream that cut the narrow path they were following. She decided not to rush an answer. Their unrushed pace through a golden field of flowers, lightly flowing in an unseen breeze, invited deeper contemplation. She thought about how her life had stood still, how she had felt trapped in her mother's world, until she dared to take a step outside of it. How that step had set her on a new path that eventually led her to here. "I think I am always changing," she said as they left the field of flowers and neared the other cliff's edge of the giant's finger. "Where I am, who I am with, changes me. Right now, I am a person who has traveled halfway across our solar system to save some of my friends." That broke his emotionless expression, and he smiled at her and said, "Pleased to meet you. I am indeed oldest." Relief flooded her inner being as they again walked for a spell in contemplative silence, readying for what was sure to be a monumental conversation. They reached a diner that perched precariously over the cliff, overlooking the very near edge of the dome. A bright neon sign advertised it as the restaurant at the edge of the universe. They sat at a table near the window facing the edge. The dome's glass was slowly clearing as day turned to dusk, revealing the view of space and Saturn slowly ascending into view. A robot waiter took their order and then disappeared. Having gotten over the initial shock of finally meeting the most famous and influential man in human history, a living legend, and finding him, frankly, rather underwhelming. Apart from his extraordinary painting skills, he showed no sign of any of the godlike attributes she had imagined on him. He simply sat there, observing her contentedly with an indecipherable Mona Lisa smile, allowing her time to think how she wanted to start the conversation. So many mixed thoughts competing to be voiced. Her admiration of the dome and his many other contributions to history. She wanted to ask how he had lived so long. Was there a secret to it? The thought that was the loudest and in the end won out was the question of why. Why had he abandoned the plan to help humanity fully establish itself in space? Why had he not aided the PBAIs? Why had he not protected the cities? Did he not know how bad things had become on Earth? Did you know? She began, still thinking how to pose the question. His expression softened, and in a gentle voice he simply said, "I knew." He waited and watched as she took this in. So he knew, and yet had done nothing. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. Quickly realizing the vagueness of her question, she elaborated with rising intensity. "If you knew what was going on, why didn't you help? How could you let those horrible people get away with doing such terrible things?" Emotion crept into her voice as her own guilt over the role she'd played in the revolution surged forward, transforming into anger directed at him. At his inaction, her tone rose, and then fell back into embarrassment as she struggled to regain control. All the while, Oldest sat calmly, quietly observing, waiting for her to find her center again. He shifted in his seat and gazed thoughtfully outside at Saturn. One of the mixed blessings of a long life is that you get to live to see the consequences of your actions. He began softly, just as their order arrived. He handed her some cutlery, encouraging her to start eating, and then continued. "I do not know how much you know about my past, but I will assume that you know some of it." She nodded with her mouth full of deliciously simple hamburger. "Good. Well, there's a quote from a poet long dead. 'The road to hell is paved with good intentions.' It is, admittedly, a bit dramatic. However, I feel it describes my answer in a nutshell. I have lived much longer than we humans are built to live. During that time, I have struggled to hold on to my humanity. And I have, in my way, I still care deeply," he said, gazing back out the window contemplative. I see more clearly than most how actions ripple through time, how my selfish or selfless choices unfold. Yet even I can only see so far. The darkest moments can reveal otherwise hidden paths, while the brightest can cast shadows never intended. When it comes to life, its evolution and growth, his visage went grim as he dove into some unspoken memory. Pain and suffering are indispensable teachers. He looked directly into her eyes, voice gentle and empathetic. And destruction paves the way for new beginnings. She had finished her burger slowly while he spoke, imagining what he must have felt, living through the war instigated by his own manifesto and countless other painful examples he had likely endured. Good intentions leading to horrible consequences. A child learning how to walk will fall. Again and again, Oldest said, taking a thoughtful bite from his plate. But if you always help it up, it will never learn to stand on its own. That is my why, or at least part of it. I hear what you're saying, she began, echoing the careful phrase her mother always used when about to disagree. But if everyone thought that way, wouldn't we all just die out? It's because we look after one another that we survive and thrive. He nodded. True. However, then the question becomes, how do you choose your connections, your attachments, your friends, and how far do you go for them? See, I'm not advocating against empathy. Not at all. I find it beautiful that you care enough to have made it all the way out here. Kudos to you. He lifted his glass in a genuine toast. Still, he continued gently, I would be interested in repeating this conversation after time has hardened you, after it's broken your heart, your trust, your faith in others, showing you the dichotomy of morality and reality. You see, my dilemma isn't about choosing to be good or bad. I have my own evolving moral code, aiming to benefit existence as a whole. My difficulty derives from how I position myself within that whole. At my age, with my power, it's easy for me to believe it is my right, perhaps even my duty, to control and direct the course of humanity. He paused briefly, gaze distant. Like a farmer tending his flock. The problem arises when my presence creates dependency. My good intentions rob my subjects of their free will, denying them the chance to develop self-reliance. He wiped his lips with a napkin and moved to get up. Shall we take a walk and continue outside? They left the restaurant, heading inland towards an oak forest populated by deer, foxes, and rabbits, and countless other animals going about their lives, predators and prey coexisting. Would you give up a day to help a stranger? Oldest asked gently. Most people would. But would you give up a year? 10 years? Your entire life? Every choice you make involves prioritizing your time and attention. Who to help, who not to help, when to step in, and when to stay back. You could spend every waking moment trying to save people individually, or lock yourself in a lab chasing cures for disease, or devote yourself entirely to fighting injustice. Yet you'll never know which path ultimately does the most good. He paused, watching a leaf float by. So we make our own choices, and we hope. She frowned deeply, meeting his gaze with a mix of frustration and confusion. Are you saying I shouldn't have come here? That I should try not to help? Oldest shook his head firmly. No, quite the opposite. Your courage impresses me. But your question was why I didn't step in, why I didn't stop your mother's regime, why I didn't help those suffering on earth. The truth is, he sighed, his voice steady but heavy. Every time I intervened, every time I took control, believing I knew better, it backfired disastrously. My intention was always to help, but the results? He trailed off, eyes haunted by memory. My action sparked the first Great War. My attempt to fix that disaster indirectly fueled the next one. He sat down on a bench beneath a grove of whispering leaves, the air around him glowing softly in the dimming light. I eventually realized humanity didn't need me to be their god, controlling from up high. With or without me, there would always be suffering and hardship mixed in with the good. She stared, clearly wrestling with his words. But you didn't step back completely. The cities, my city, you created them, set those boundaries. Yes, he admitted. I did. I convinced myself it was necessary. Having been through the end of the world twice, life had come so close to total extinction. If not for our intervention, no thread would have survived to regrow, to continue life's experiment on Earth. I drew boundaries, then stopped entirely. I left humanity to itself, turning my efforts here instead. She hesitated, clearly torn. But why don't you undo it then? Why leave them trapped for generations? Can't you set them free? He met her eyes thoughtfully. Setting them free would be another intervention, another choice, another risk. I fear repeating the same cycle all over again. At least this way, I know humanity won't wipe itself out and destroy all other life in the process. He paused, studying her closely. Why? Do you think I should? Would your mother's people not seize control in a newly opened world? You think that would have a good likelihood of a happy ending? I think, she started, then faltered. She didn't know what she thought anymore. Confusion replaced her earlier certainty. She had come here convinced that Oldest would immediately help her friends, that he would know exactly how to fix things. I don't know. I was just so sure you'd agree, that you'd see it was the right thing to do. Yes, he laughed gently, without mockery. There are few things more motivating and intoxicating than a just cause. It took me centuries to learn that particular lesson. He stood and signaled for her to follow. Honestly, despite my reservations, I always assumed I'd return to Earth one day. But then I got caught up in my ultimate project, the final thing I'll do in this world before I leave it. She followed him out of the forest into wide open field. Wild ponies galloped joyfully across the plains, their exuberance the exact opposite of how she felt hearing his words. Was Oldest about to die? What kind of project? She asked, carefully avoiding the heavier topic hanging unspoken between them. He glanced back at her, smiling. Let me show you.